The alarm sounded at exactly 0300 hours, pulling Lieutenant Susan Walsh from a dream she couldn't quite remember. Her eyes snapped open in the darkness of her quarters aboard Outpost 7, and for a moment she lay perfectly still, listening to the persistent beeping that refused to stop. This wasn't a drill. The computer would have announced it if it was. She threw off her blanket and moved to her desk, fingers dancing across the control panel before her mind had fully caught up with her body. The screen lit up, bathing her small room in cold blue light. What she saw made her breath catch in her throat. 314 contacts. The sensors were showing 314 ships approaching the outer veil at steady velocity. Susan had been stationed at this remote monitoring post for 2 years, and in all that time, she had never seen more than a handful of vessels pass through this region. Now there was an entire fleet bearing down on their position. She pulled up the identification protocols and ran them against the approaching signatures. The results came back within seconds. Caltharian. Every single ship was Caltharian, and the composition of the fleet sent ice through her veins. Mining vessels, refinery ships, ore haulers, and enough military escorts to start a small war. This wasn't an exploration mission or a trade convoy. This was an invasion force designed to strip mine an entire star system. Susan reached for her communicator with shaking hands. She pressed the emergency contact sequence and waited. The response came almost immediately, the deep voice of Commander Jack Murphy cutting through the silence of her quarters. "Commander Murphy, this is Walsh at Outpost 7. I have a priority alert. 300-plus Caltharian vessels inbound to the outer veil. Mining configuration with military escort. Estimated arrival in 42 hours. There was a pause on the other end, just long enough for Susan to wonder if the transmission had failed. Then Murphy spoke again, his voice carrying a weight she had never heard before. "Confirmed, Lieutenant. Send me all your sensor data, everything you have. And Walsh, this stays between us for now. No general broadcast." "Understood, sir. Transmitting now." Susan uploaded the data and watched it stream toward Mars, where Murphy ran the Deep Space Defense Command from a facility buried deep beneath the red planet's surface. She had never met the commander in person, but his reputation preceded him. Murphy was old guard, a veteran of the last major conflict with an alien species over 60 years ago. He had been young then, barely out of the academy. Now he was one of the few humans alive who remembered what it meant to fight for survival against an enemy that wanted to take everything. Across the vast emptiness of space, aboard the Caltharian flagship, Supreme Mining Director Vexther stood before a holographic display that showed the 12 spherical objects floating in perfect formation. His compound eyes gleamed with reflected light as he studied the scans, his mandibles clicking together in what any human would have recognized as excitement. These spheres were massive, each one approximately the size of a small moon. The initial scans had revealed composition readings that made Vexther's blood sing with anticipation. Rare metals, exotic elements, materials that existed nowhere else in charted space. The value of just one of these objects would make him wealthier than most planetary governors. All 12 would establish a dynasty that would last for generations. The fact that these spheres sat in unclaimed space, right at the edge of human territory, only made the prize sweeter. The humans were weak, everyone knew that. They had retreated to their little corner of the galaxy after their last war and had stayed there ever since, content to trade and negotiate rather than expand and conquer. They would protest, certainly. They might even send a ship or two to observe, but they would do nothing to stop the greatest mining operation in Caltharian history. Vexther turned to address the other figure on the bridge. Fleet Commander Zarkoth stood with his arms crossed behind his back, his military uniform immaculate despite the long journey from Caltharian space. The commander's face was harder to read than Vexther's, carved from decades of military service into an expression of permanent skepticism. "Commander, inform the fleet we will begin positioning in 36 hours. I want mining operations to commence within 48 hours of arrival. We start with the nearest sphere and work our way through the formation." Zarkoth inclined his head slightly but did not move. Director, I must again voice my concerns. These objects are too perfect, too symmetrical. Natural formation does not produce 12 spheres of identical size in geometric arrangement. Vexter waved one of his upper appendages dismissively. You worry too much, Commander. So the humans arranged some asteroids in a pattern. Perhaps they had plans for this region once. Those plans clearly came to nothing. The spheres have been here for over 200 years according to the records. They are abandoned, forgotten, and now they are ours. Before Zarkoth could respond, another voice cut through the bridge. Surveyor Hicksnell approached from his station, holding a data tablet that he thrust toward the director with barely concealed agitation. Director, you need to see this. I've been running detailed scans on the nearest sphere. The density readings are wrong. The electromagnetic signature doesn't match natural formation. And look at this. Hicksnell pulled up an enhanced image on the tablet. It showed the surface of one sphere, magnified to reveal details that the standard scans had missed. There, faint but unmistakable, were lines, seams. They stretched across the surface in patterns that could only be artificial. Vexter barely glanced at the image before turning away. Surface irregularities, probably from meteor impacts or stellar radiation over time. Surveyor, your caution is noted but unnecessary. We did not bring 300 ships across half the galaxy to turn back because of some lines on a rock. Zarkoth took the tablet from Hicksnell and studied the image more carefully. His expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes. Director, perhaps we should send a probe first. Conduct a more thorough analysis before we commit the fleet. Vexter turned on the commander, his voice rising. We are on a schedule, Commander. Every day we delay costs resources. The fleet has its orders. We proceed as planned. On Mars, deep in the command center that few humans even knew existed, Jack Murphy stood before a holographic display that hadn't been activated in 40 years. The room around him was old, built during a time when humanity still believed it might need to fight again. The walls were bare metal, the air tasted of recycled atmosphere, and the lights cast harsh shadows across Murphy's weathered face. He had reviewed Susan Walsh's data 3 times now, checking and rechecking the numbers. There was no mistake. The Caltharian fleet was heading straight for the outer veil, straight for the 12 spheres that floated in perfect silence at the edge of human space. The spheres that the Caltharians thought were natural objects, rich with valuable minerals. The spheres that humanity had built 40 years ago and then deliberately forgotten. Murphy reached out and activated a control panel that had gathered dust for decades. The holographic display changed, showing 12 icons arranged in a geometric pattern. Each icon pulsed with a steady green light, dormant, waiting, exactly as they had been for the past 4 decades. He opened a communication channel, marking it with the highest priority encryption. Admiral Palmer, this is Murphy. We have a situation. I'm sending you access codes you're going to want to see. Project Sentinel is active again. The response came quickly. Admiral George Palmer was commander of the Human Colonial Defense Fleet, a position that mostly involved coordinating supply runs and mediating disputes between colony worlds. He was younger than Murphy by a decade, which meant he had been barely out of childhood during the last war. But he was smart, and more importantly, he listened. Murphy, I'm looking at these files, and I don't understand half of what I'm seeing. These access codes are dated. They reference systems I've never heard of. What is Project Sentinel? Murphy pulled up a second display and began cycling through schematics that looked more like science fiction than military hardware. It's what we built after the last war, after we nearly lost everything. The 12 spheres in the outer veil aren't natural, Admiral. They're defense platforms. We called them Sentinels. Each one is actually a battle station with enough firepower to sterilize a star system. They've been in sleep mode for 40 years, gathering solar energy, waiting for activation. There was a long silence on the other end. When Palmer spoke again, his voice was carefully controlled. You're telling me we've had 12 moon-sized weapons sitting at the edge of our territory for 40 years and nobody thought to mention this? That was the point, Admiral. After the last war, we decided we needed insurance. Something that would make anyone think twice before testing our borders. But we also decided it needed to be secret. If other species knew about the sentinels, they might see them as a threat. An arms race would start, so we disguised them as natural objects and put them to sleep. Only a handful of people even know they exist. Most of them are dead now. And now the Caltharians are about to start drilling into one, Murphy finished. We need to decide what to do about that. Palmer was quiet for a moment. Who designed these things? Who can tell us what they're actually capable of? Murphy checked another file. Dr. Helen Grant. She was the chief scientist on the project. She's retired now, living in the Arizona territories, but she's still alive. I'm bringing her in. 48 hours later, Dr. Helen Grant stood in the same command center where she had watched the Sentinels come online for the first time 4 decades ago. She was 73 now, her hair completely white, her hands marked with age spots and old scars from a lifetime of engineering work. But her eyes were as sharp as ever when she looked at the displays showing the approaching Caltharian fleet. "I never thought I'd see this day," she said quietly. "We built them hoping they would never need to wake up. That's why we made them look like natural objects. We wanted deterrence, not confrontation." Murphy stood beside her, his arms crossed. "Dr. Grant, I need to know exactly what these stations can do. The Caltharians have over 60 military vessels with them. If this goes wrong, can the Sentinels handle that?" Grant turned to him with an expression that was hard to read. "Commander, each Sentinel has been gathering solar energy for 40 years. They're at maximum capacity. Their power reserves could run Earth's largest city for a century. As for what they can do," she paused, pulling up a schematic on the nearest display. "Let me put it this way. One Sentinel could destroy that entire Caltharian fleet in approximately 4 minutes. All 12 working together, the fleet wouldn't last 60 seconds. Palmer, who had arrived an hour earlier, leaned forward. "You're saying we have enough firepower in the outer veil to fight off any invasion fleet from any known species?" Grant nodded. "That was the idea. After the last war, we decided humanity needed an absolute defense, something that would make invasion impossible. The Sentinels aren't just weapons platforms. They're a statement. They say that human territory has a line and that line cannot be crossed." Murphy pulled up a communication panel. "Then we need to warn the Caltharians. Give them a chance to turn back before we activate the stations. Captain Boyd, are you in position?" The response came from the Pioneer Dawn, a small research vessel that had been hastily redirected to intercept the Caltharian fleet. Captain Danny Boyd's voice crackled through the speakers. "Affirmative, Commander. We're 3 hours ahead of the Caltharian formation. Ready to make contact. Proceed, Captain. Standard first contact protocols. Inform them that the spheres are human defense installations and that they need to withdraw immediately. Be polite but firm. Let's hope they listen." Aboard the Pioneer Dawn, Captain Danny Boyd sat in his command chair and watched as the massive Caltharian fleet appeared on his sensors. 300 ships, all of them larger than his vessel. He had served in the research division for 20 years, studying asteroid formations and mapping stellar phenomena. He had never expected to be the one delivering what might be humanity's most important message in half a century. He opened a channel on all standard frequencies, broadcasting in both human languages and the Caltharian trade dialect that most alien species used for communication. "Attention, Caltharian fleet. This is Captain Danny Boyd of the human vessel Pioneer Dawn. We are aware of your approach to the spherical objects in the outer veil region. We are here to inform you that these objects are not natural formations. They are human defense installations placed here 40 years ago to protect our territorial boundaries. We request that you alter your course immediately and withdraw from this region. If you proceed, you will be in violation of human sovereign space and appropriate defensive measures will be taken." Boyd waited, watching his communication panel for a response. It came within minutes. The view screen lit up with the image of Supreme Mining Director Vexler, his compound eyes reflecting the lights of his bridge. When he spoke, the translation software rendered his clicking mandibles into clear human speech. "Captain Boyd, how interesting to finally receive human contact. We have been monitoring these objects for 3 standard months. Your claim that they are defense installations is noted. However, our scans show no active systems, no energy signatures, no signs of habitation or maintenance. These objects have been dormant for over 2 centuries according to galactic records. Under interstellar salvage law, they are considered abandoned property. We have already invested substantial resources in this expedition. We will proceed with our operations. You have 48 hours to remove any personnel from the immediate area. After that, mining will commence. The transmission ended before Boyd could respond. He stared at the blank screen for a moment, then opened the channel back to Mars. Commander Murphy, they're not backing down. They claim salvage rights. They say the spheres are abandoned property. In the command center, Murphy exchanged glances with Admiral Palmer and Dr. Grant. The Admiral spoke first. Can we activate the Sentinels partially? Show them we're serious without actually firing. Grant shook her head. The Sentinels have an identification protocol. It's designed to be recognized by any species with advanced sensors. Low-frequency pulses that translate into mathematical language. We can activate that without bringing the stations fully online. It's a final warning system. Murphy nodded. Do it. Activate the identification protocols. Let's see if the Caltharians are smart enough to recognize a warning when they see one. Grant's fingers moved across a control panel that had been waiting for this moment for 40 years. Deep in the outer veil, systems began to wake up. The 12 Sentinels, dormant for so long, started to emit low-frequency pulses. The pulses were precisely timed, following mathematical patterns that any advanced civilization would recognize as artificial. The translation was simple and universal. Weapons platform. Do not approach. Aboard the Caltharian flagship, Surveyor Hicksnell detected the pulses within seconds. He ran them through the analysis computer, his movements becoming more frantic as the results appeared. He practically ran across the bridge to where Vexthor and Zarkoth stood reviewing the mining schedule. Director, Commander, the spheres are broadcasting. Low-frequency pulses, mathematical sequences. The computer has translated them. They're saying weapons platform. They're warning us. Zarkoth took the data tablet and examined it carefully. He looked at Vexthor. Director, this changes things. If the spheres are broadcasting warnings, they are clearly not abandoned. We should consider withdrawing until we have more information. Vexthor made a dismissive gesture. Automated systems. Old equipment left behind by the humans decades ago. They probably activate whenever something gets close. It means nothing. The spheres are still dormant. Our scans show no active weapons, no shield generators, no power sources beyond basic maintenance systems. These warnings are ghosts from the past, nothing more. He turned to address the entire bridge crew. Fleet-wide announcement. All ships prepare for mining operations. We begin in 24 hours, drilling teams to standby positions. This is what we came here for. We will not be frightened away by old machinery. Back at Outpost 7, Susan Walsh watched her sensors with growing anxiety. The Caltharian fleet was moving into position around the nearest sentinel. Massive drilling ships were deploying their equipment, extending drill assemblies that could bore through solid rock. The fleet had ignored the warning pulses completely. They were going to drill into a sentinel. She opened a channel to Mars. Commander, they're not stopping. First drilling ship is moving into contact position. Estimate initial drilling in 6 hours. In the command center, Murphy looked at Dr. Grant. The older woman stood with her hands clasped behind her back, staring at the holographic display showing the 12 Sentinels and the Caltharian fleet surrounding them. Her expression was sad but resolute. We gave them every chance, she said quietly. We warned them. We gave them time to leave. They chose not to listen. Murphy turned to Admiral Palmer. Sir, requesting authorization to activate the Sentinel network. Full defensive protocol. Palmer stood silent for a long moment, the weight of the decision visible on his face. Then he nodded. Authorization granted. Dr. Grant, the stations are yours. Bring them online. Grant moved to the main control console. Her hands hovered over the activation panel for just a second, remembering the day 40 years ago when she had first powered down these stations, hoping they would sleep forever. Then she entered the command sequence, each keystroke deliberate and final. The signal traveled at the speed of light from Mars to the outer veil, arriving at all 12 Sentinels simultaneously. Deep within each massive sphere, systems that had been dormant for 4 decades began to wake. Power cores that had been accumulating energy for years suddenly came online. Computers that had been running only minimal maintenance subroutines activated their full processing capacity. Weapon systems that had never been fired outside of initial testing began their startup sequences. Aboard the Caltharian drilling ship closest to the first Sentinel, the crew was making final preparations for the initial bore. The massive drill bit was extended, its tip just meters from the surface of what they still believed was a mineral-rich sphere. The ship's captain gave the order to begin drilling. The drill bit touched the surface of the Sentinel. For 1 second, nothing happened. Then the seams that Surveyor Hicksnell had detected days earlier began to glow. Faint blue light appeared along lines that stretched for thousands of miles across the Sentinel's surface. The light grew brighter, pulsing in rhythm with some vast internal power source. The drilling ship tried to pull away, its captain suddenly realizing that something was terribly wrong. But it was already too late. The sections of the Sentinel's outer shell began to separate along those glowing seams. Massive plates of camouflage armor, each one larger than a city, started to fold back. They moved with impossible grace for objects so large, pivoting on hidden mechanisms that had been waiting for this moment. Beneath the outer shell, the true nature of the Sentinel was revealed. It was not a sphere of rock and metal. It was a battle station. The exposed surface was covered in weapon arrays, each one precisely positioned for maximum coverage. Shield generators glowed with building energy. Sensor grids activated, painting the entire Caltharian fleet with targeting data. Communication arrays extended, ready to coordinate with the other 11 Sentinels. On the Caltharian flagship, alarms began to sound across every station. Vexthor stood frozen, staring at the viewscreen as the sphere in front of them transformed from a natural object into the most powerful weapon he had ever seen. Around them, the other 11 spheres were doing the same thing. The Caltharian fleet, spread out to maximize mining efficiency, suddenly found itself surrounded by 12 awakening battle stations. Zarkoth's voice cut through the chaos on the bridge. All ships, emergency retreat. Break formation and withdraw to safe distance. Move now. But the Caltharian ships were massive mining vessels, built for stability and carrying capacity, not speed or maneuverability. They began to turn, their engines burning at maximum output, but it would take time. Time they might not have. At Outpost 7, Susan Walsh watched her sensor displays with a mixture of fear and awe. The Sentinels were coming online faster than she could track. Energy readings were climbing into ranges she had never seen before. Each station was broadcasting targeting data, threat assessments, and coordination protocols to its neighbors. The 12 separate battle stations were operating as a single unified network. She opened her channel to Mars. "Commander, all 12 Sentinels are active. They've completed their startup sequence. Energy signatures are," she paused, checking her readings again to make sure they were correct. "Sir, each station is generating enough power to be visible from here. I can see them glowing. They're lighting up the entire region." The Sentinels began to rotate. Each station was spinning slowly on its axis, bringing different weapon arrays to bear on the trapped Caltharian fleet. It was a deliberate movement, careful and precise. The stations were not rushing. They were demonstrating control, showing that they had all the time in the world to do what needed to be done. Vexthor finally found his voice. "Get me a channel to the human commander. Now, emergency frequency. Do it." The transmission reached Mars within seconds. Murphy's face appeared on the Caltharian viewscreen, his expression calm and controlled. "Supreme Mining Director Vexthor. I am Commander Jack Murphy of the Human Deep Space Defense Command. I believe you now understand that our warning was serious. The objects you intended to mine are our Sentinel defense stations. They have been here for 40 years waiting. You chose to ignore our warnings and proceed with drilling operations. That was a mistake." Vexthor's voice was shaking. "Commander Murphy, we had no knowledge that these were active military installations. We will withdraw immediately. Please, there is no need for violence. We are leaving." Murphy leaned forward slightly, his eyes hard. "You have 30 minutes to leave human space. All vessels will maintain their current course away from the Sentinels. Any ship that deviates, any ship that powers weapons, any ship that does anything except leave will be destroyed. The Sentinels have been given permission to fire. Do you understand? Vexter nodded frantically. We understand. We are leaving. 30 minutes. We will be gone. Murphy's transmission ended. The Caltharian fleet began its retreat, every ship burning their engines at maximum sustainable output. They left behind their drilling equipment, their survey probes, their mining drones. None of it mattered anymore. All that mattered was getting away from the 12 massive weapons platforms that had been disguised as planets. In the command center on Mars, Dr. Helen Grant watched the Caltharian fleet flee. The Sentinels continued to track them, weapon ports glowing with ready energy, but no shots were fired. After a few minutes, she spoke quietly. 40 years. We built these stations 40 years ago and hoped we would never need them. Today they woke up and did exactly what they were designed to do. They defended the line. They made it clear that some boundaries cannot be crossed, and they did it without firing a single shot. Murphy nodded. But the secret is out now. Every species in the galaxy is going to know about the Sentinels within a week. Everything changes from here. Admiral Palmer joined them at the display. Perhaps that's not a bad thing. For 40 years, other species looked at humanity and saw weakness. They saw a species that retreated after one war and never expanded again. Now they'll know the truth. We weren't weak. We were patient. And we were ready. The three of them stood in silence, watching the holographic display as the Caltharian fleet grew smaller and smaller, fleeing from weapons that had been sleeping in the darkness for decades. The 12 Sentinels remained active, their outer shells still open, their weapons still charged. They would stay that way for now. The galaxy needed to see them, needed to understand what humanity had built and what it meant. They thought they were planets, Murphy said quietly. They thought they were finding abandoned minerals at the edge of empty space. They had no idea they were waking up the Guardians. And now the whole galaxy is going to learn what it means to cross the line we drew 40 years ago. The 30-minute countdown began the moment Commander Murphy ended his transmission. Aboard the Caltharian flagship, chaos had replaced the confident atmosphere that had dominated the bridge just hours earlier. Supreme Mining Director Vexter stood gripping the edge of his command console, watching the tactical display as his fleet scattered in every direction, trying to put distance between themselves and the 12 awakened battle stations. Fleet Commander Zarkoth moved through the bridge with practiced efficiency, coordinating the retreat. His voice was steady as he issued orders, but Vexter could see the tension in his posture. The commander had been right all along. They should have listened to his concerns. They should have sent probes first. They should have withdrawn the moment Surveyor Hicksnell found those seams. But Vexter had been blinded by greed, by the promise of wealth beyond imagination. Now that greed might cost 300 ships and thousands of lives. He watched the display as mining vessels, refinery ships, and ore haulers all burned their engines at maximum output. The military escort ships were moving into defensive positions, creating a protective screen around the civilian vessels. It was standard military protocol when facing a superior force. Protect the civilians and prepare to buy time with your own lives if necessary. Zarkoth turned from his station. Director, the military vessels are in position. However, I must recommend we do not rely solely on retreat. Those stations have weapon capabilities we cannot match. If the humans decide to fire before we clear their territory, our military ships will be unable to provide adequate protection. Vexter felt his mandibles clicking together nervously. What are you suggesting, Commander? Zarkoth's expression hardened. I am suggesting we probe their defenses, not to attack but to understand. If we send a small squadron to test their response time, their targeting systems, their actual firepower, we will know what we face. Knowledge is survival, Director. Right now we know nothing except that those stations look impressive. It was a calculated risk, and part of Vexter recognized the military logic behind it. But another part, the part that had seen those massive weapons arrays opening across the Sentinel's surface, wanted nothing more than to run. Still, Zarkoth was the military expert. This was his domain. Do it, Vexter said quietly. But Commander, if they respond with overwhelming force, you will retreat immediately. No heroics. No last stands. We learn what we can and we leave. Understood. Zarkoth nodded and turned to his tactical officer. Deploy Squadron 7, 12 ships. Approach Vector Alpha 4 toward the nearest Sentinel. Weapons to standby but do not lock targeting systems. This is a reconnaissance pass only. Engage at 50,000 kilometers and withdraw immediately after initial contact. The 12 Caltharian military cruisers broke formation and began their approach toward the nearest Sentinel. They were fast ships, built for combat rather than cargo hauling. Their engines left bright trails across the darkness of space as they accelerated toward the massive battle station that hung in space like a mechanical moon. At Outpost 7, Susan Walsh's sensors detected the new movement immediately. She watched as the squadron separated from the main fleet and began its approach. Her fingers moved quickly across her console, calculating vectors and velocities. She opened the channel to Mars. Commander Murphy, I have 12 Caltharian military vessels breaking formation. They're on an intercept course with Sentinel-1. Current velocity suggests attack pattern. Should I consider this hostile action? In the command center on Mars, Murphy studied his own displays. He could see the Caltharian squadron approaching. He could also see the response from Sentinel-1. The battle station had already detected the approaching vessels and was adjusting its rotation to keep them in optimal firing position. The Sentinel's targeting systems were active, painting each ship with sensor sweeps. Dr. Grant stood beside him, watching the same data. They're testing us, probing to see what the Sentinels can actually do. It's smart, actually. They have no frame of reference for our capabilities. Admiral Palmer joined them at the display. The question is, how do we respond? If we do nothing, they might interpret it as weakness. If we destroy all 12 ships, we prove we're willing to kill. Neither option is ideal. Murphy was quiet for a moment, thinking through the options. Then he turned to Grant. Doctor, can the Sentinels fire at partial power? Show them what the weapons can do without actually destroying the target. Grant pulled up a weapon schematic on her personal display. The molecular disruptors have variable output settings. At full power, they break down molecular bonds completely. The target simply ceases to exist at an atomic level. But at minimum power, she traced a line across the schematic with her finger. They can still demonstrate capability. We could take out the lead ship and let the others witness it. One example to make the point clear. Murphy nodded slowly. One ship, make it clean. Make it absolute, and make sure the other 11 see exactly what happened. Lieutenant Walsh, are you monitoring this channel? Susan's voice came through clearly. Yes, sir. I'm tracking all movements, document everything, full sensor recordings. I want a complete record of what happens next. Murphy took a breath. Dr. Grant, you have authorization. Sentinel-1, engage lead target. Molecular disruptor, minimum power setting. Grant entered the command sequence. The signal traveled to Sentinel-1 at light speed. The massive battle station had been tracking the approaching squadron since they left the main fleet. Now it received permission to fire. A single weapon port opened on the station's equator, one of 4,000 identical systems arrayed across its surface. The port was small, barely visible against the vast bulk of the Sentinel, but what it contained represented 40 years of human engineering focused on a single purpose. The molecular disruptor activated. There was no dramatic buildup, no visible charging effect. One moment the weapon port was open and dark. The next moment, a beam of energy no thicker than a human arm reached across 50,000 kilometers of space and touched the lead Caltharian cruiser. The effect was immediate and absolute. The cruiser's hull began to shimmer, like heat waves rising from hot pavement. Then the shimmer intensified, spreading across the entire ship in less than a second. The molecular bonds that held the vessel together, the forces that made metal solid and kept air contained, simply stopped working. The ship didn't explode. It didn't burn. It came apart at a fundamental level, dissolving into its component atoms. Where a warship had been, there was now only a cloud of dispersing particles. No debris, no wreckage, no escape pods. The cruiser and everyone aboard it had been unmade in the space of a single heartbeat. The remaining 11 Caltharian ships scattered immediately, their formation breaking as each captain made the instant decision to flee. They turned hard, their engines screaming at maximum output, desperate to put distance between themselves and the sentinel. The battle station made no attempt to pursue. It simply rotated slightly, tracking their flight but keeping its weapons silent. On the Caltharian flagship, the entire bridge had fallen silent. Every screen showed the same impossible thing. One of their military cruisers, a ship designed to withstand direct hits from the most powerful weapons in the Caltharian arsenal, had simply ceased to exist. No battle, no struggle, just there one moment and gone the next. Surveyor Hicksnell was the first to speak, his voice barely above a whisper. The molecular structure. They broke down the molecular structure. That weapon doesn't destroy matter. It unmakes it, converts it back to free atoms. The energy required for that, he trailed off, unable to finish the calculation. Fleet Commander Zarkoth stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his expression carefully neutral despite the shock he must be feeling. Director Vexler, I formally recommend immediate full retreat. Whatever these humans have built, it is beyond our capacity to challenge. We should consider ourselves fortunate they fired only once. Vexler could only nod. His dreams of wealth, of glory, of establishing a dynasty had dissolved as completely as that cruiser. All fleet vessels, this is the director. Full retreat, maximum velocity. Abandon all equipment and materials. Just get us out of human space. Move now. But even as the fleet began to turn, another voice cut through the bridge communications. It was the captain of one of the military escort ships, his transmission marked as emergency priority. Director, Commander, you need to hear this. Murphy just broadcast a message on all frequencies. He says what we just witnessed was the lowest power setting of a single weapon on a single station. He says each sentinel has 4,000 of those weapons. And he says we have 20 minutes to clear human space or they will demonstrate full capability. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. 4,000 weapons per station, 12 stations. If each weapon could do what they had just witnessed, if each one could unmake a ship with a single touch, then the Caltharian fleet was completely at the mercy of the humans. They could be erased from existence in seconds. Zarkoth's military training took over. All ships increased to maximum emergency velocity. Civilian vessels to the center of the formation. Military ships maintain defensive perimeter but do not power weapons. We show submission. We show we are no threat. And we pray the humans value mercy over demonstration. The fleet was moving now, but not fast enough. The mining ships were never designed for speed. They were bulk carriers, built to haul massive amounts of ore across vast distances. Their maximum velocity was less than half what the military escorts could achieve. If the humans decided to fire, the civilian ships would be helpless. Vexler watched the countdown timer on his display. 17 minutes remaining. At their current velocity, they would clear human territory in approximately 40 minutes. They were going to be late. The humans had given them 20 minutes, and they could not possibly comply. In the command center on Mars, Dr. Grant was explaining the weapon they had just used to a group of younger officers who had gathered around the displays. The molecular disruptor works by targeting the electromagnetic force that holds molecules together. It's one of the 4 fundamental forces of nature. When we disrupt that force in a localized area, matter simply comes apart. The atoms remain, but the structure is gone. One of the officers, a young man who looked like he had just graduated from the academy, raised his hand hesitantly. Dr. Grant, if each sentinel has 4,000 of those weapons, and we have 12 sentinels, that's 48,000 weapons. What could we do with that kind of firepower? Grant looked at Murphy and Palmer before answering. Admiral Palmer spoke instead. Theoretically, Lieutenant, we could defend against an invasion fleet from every known species in the galaxy simultaneously. The Sentinels were designed as an absolute defense. Not to conquer, not to expand, but to make sure that no one could take what was ours. They're a line in the darkness, and that line cannot be crossed. Murphy was watching the tactical display, where the Caltharian fleet continued its desperate retreat. The military ships were pulling ahead now, their superior speed allowing them to put distance between themselves and the Sentinels. But the civilian vessels were falling behind, forming a trailing tail of slower ships that stretched across thousands of kilometers. Susan Walsh's voice came through the speakers. "Commander, I'm tracking 63 ships that will not clear human space within the 20-minute deadline. They're all civilian mining and refinery vessels. Maximum velocity insufficient for deadline compliance." Palmer turned to Murphy. "Your call, Commander. Do we extend the deadline or do we demonstrate that we mean what we say?" Murphy was silent for a long moment. The room waited. Finally, he spoke. "Dr. Grant, can the Sentinels do anything besides destroy? Any other capability that might help us make a point without killing thousands of civilians?" Grant's eyes widened slightly. "The gravity web. We installed it as a defensive system, but it could work for this. Each Sentinel can generate and project localized gravity fields. They were designed to deflect incoming missiles or debris, but if we coordinate all 12 stations, we could create a gravity field strong enough to affect those ships." "What would that do to them?" Palmer asked. Grant pulled up a simulation on her display. "If we're careful, if we balance the forces precisely, we could pull the ships toward a central point between the Sentinels. Hold them there, suspended by carefully managed gravity fields. It would be uncomfortable for the crews, probably some minor injuries from the acceleration, but survivable. And it would demonstrate something the weapon discharge didn't show." "What's that?" Murphy asked. "Control. The molecular disruptor shows we can destroy. The gravity web shows we can manipulate. It shows that we have options beyond simple destruction, that we can reach out and move 300 ships like toys if we choose. It might be more terrifying than just blowing them up." Palmer nodded slowly. "Do it, but doctor, make sure those civilian ships aren't crushed. We're trying to send a message, not commit genocide." Grant's fingers flew across her console. "This is complex. I need to coordinate all 12 Sentinels simultaneously. Give me 2 minutes." The command center fell silent as Grant worked. She was pulling up calculations that hadn't been used in 40 years, systems that had been tested only once during the initial activation of the Sentinel network. The gravity web was one of the most sophisticated pieces of technology humanity had ever developed. It required precise coordination between all 12 stations, each one generating a portion of the overall field, balanced perfectly so the forces didn't tear the target apart. "Ready," she announced. "On your command, Commander." Murphy opened a channel to the Caltharian fleet. "Director Vexler, this is Commander Murphy. Your civilian vessels will not clear our territory in time. Normally, this would result in their destruction. Instead, we're going to demonstrate another capability of the Sentinel network. Consider this an education. What you're about to experience is what happens when humanity decides to be gentle. Execute, Dr. Grant." All 12 Sentinels activated their gravity projectors simultaneously. Space itself seemed to ripple as massive gravitational fields formed and reached out across thousands of kilometers. The effect on the Caltharian fleet was immediate and dramatic. Ships that had been fleeing in different directions suddenly found themselves pulled off course. Not violently, not with bone-crushing force, but with steady, irresistible pressure. The military escort ships felt it first. Their engines were already at maximum, but now they were fighting against a force that was pulling them backward, back toward the Sentinels. Captains increased power, trying to break free, but it was useless. The gravity fields were too strong, too precisely balanced. The ships began to slide backward despite their best efforts. The civilian ships had no chance at all. They were pulled away from their retreat vectors and dragged toward a point in space directly between the 12 Sentinels. Some captains tried to maneuver, tried to use lateral thrusters to break free of the pull. Nothing worked. The gravity fields had them, and the gravity fields were not letting go. On the flagship, alarms were screaming. Vexler gripped his console as the entire ship shuddered under the strain. They were being pulled backward, away from safety, back toward the center of the Sentinel formation. He watched the tactical display in horror as every ship in his fleet, all 300 vessels, was dragged inexorably toward the same point in space. "Commander, what's happening? Why can't we break free?" Vexler shouted over the sound of the alarms. Zarkoth was studying his tactical displays with the focused intensity of a soldier trying to understand the weapon that was about to kill him. "They're generating artificial gravity fields. Multiple sources, perfectly balanced." We're being pulled toward the center point between all 12 stations. And Director, we cannot resist this. Our engines are not designed to fight gravity. Nothing is. The fleet compressed as ships were drawn together. 300 vessels that had been spread across thousands of kilometers were now being forced into a space barely a few hundred kilometers across. Ships that had been fleeing in opposite directions found themselves on collision courses. Proximity alarms added to the chaos as captains tried desperately to avoid crashing into each other. But the human control was precise. The gravity fields adjusted constantly, maintaining separation between vessels even as they compressed the fleet into a tighter and tighter formation. It was like watching a giant invisible hand gathering toys, pushing them together but making sure none of them touched. After 2 minutes that felt like hours, the compression stopped. The entire Caltharian fleet hung suspended in space between the 12 sentinels, held in place by forces they could not see and could not resist. Engines still burned at maximum, but the ships went nowhere. They were trapped in a cage made of gravity itself. At Outpost 7, Susan Walsh stared at her sensor readings in disbelief. The gravity readings she was getting were impossible. No natural phenomenon could generate fields that strong, that precisely controlled. She ran the numbers again, checking for sensor error. There was none. The sentinels were generating gravitational forces equivalent to a small star, and they were controlling those forces with pinpoint accuracy. She opened her channel to Mars, her voice shaking slightly. "Commander Murphy, I'm reading gravity fields that shouldn't be possible. The level of control required to hold 300 ships in formation without crushing them. It's beyond anything I've ever seen. How is this even possible?" In the command center, Grant answered instead of Murphy. "Lieutenant Walsh, the Sentinels were built to be the pinnacle of human defensive technology. What you're seeing is 40 years of accumulated knowledge, implemented by the best scientists and engineers humanity had to offer. We built them to defend the line, and part of that defense is making absolutely certain that anyone who tests that line understands exactly what they're facing." Murphy opened a channel to the Caltharian fleet. "Director Vexter, your fleet is now being held by a gravity web generated by all 12 Sentinels. Your ships are undamaged, your crews are safe, but you are completely immobilized. We can hold you here indefinitely. We could increase the field strength and compress your fleet into a single point of crushed metal, or we could simply leave you here and let your life support run out. We have options." He paused, letting that sink in. "But we're not going to do any of those things. We're going to release you. And then you're going to leave our space and never return. More importantly, you're going to tell every species you encounter exactly what happened here. You're going to explain that human territory is protected by weapons that can unmake ships with a touch and by systems that can reach out and grab entire fleets like toys. Do you understand?" On the Caltharian flagship, Vexter was beyond pride, beyond shame, beyond everything except the desire to survive. "Yes, Commander Murphy, we understand. We will spread the word. Human territory is defended. Human boundaries are absolute. Please release us and we will never return." Murphy looked at Palmer, who nodded. "Grant, release the gravity web, but keep the Sentinels active. I want them to see what else we can do." Grant entered the command sequence and the gravity fields collapsed. The Caltharian ships, suddenly free of the force holding them in place, drifted for a moment before their engines caught and they began to move again. This time there was no hesitation, no testing, no probing. Every ship turned and burned at maximum velocity away from the Sentinels. But the demonstration wasn't over. As the fleet retreated, all 12 Sentinels began a synchronized display. Shield grids activated, creating shimmering barriers of energy that surrounded each station. Point defense networks came online, thousands of smaller weapons that could track and eliminate incoming missiles or fighters. Long-range sensor arrays extended, painting the entire region with detection sweeps. Communication systems linked up, creating a network that tied all 12 stations together into a single unified defense system. The Sentinels rotated, showing different weapon systems. Missile ports opened and closed. Energy projectors glowed with ready power. Each station was displaying its full capability, showing the Caltharians exactly what they had tried to drill into. It was a message written in technology and power. This is what guards the line. This is what waits in the darkness. This is what happens when you cross into human space uninvited. Captain Danny Boyd, still watching from the Pioneer Dawn, opened a private channel to Murphy. "Commander, are you sure this is wise? Showing them everything we can do." Murphy's response was immediate. "Captain, we spent 40 years hiding the Sentinels. We built them in secret, disguised them as natural objects, and hoped no one would ever test our borders. That strategy is over. The Caltharians found them. Now the whole galaxy is going to know they exist. The only question is what they know. Do they know we have hidden weapons of unknown capability? Or do they know we have visible weapons of absolute capability? I prefer the second option." On the flagship, Surveyor Hicksnell was recording everything. Every weapon system, every shield activation, every demonstration of power. His scientific mind was both terrified and fascinated. These humans had built something incredible, something that defied easy explanation. The energy requirements alone suggested technology far beyond what most species possessed. He turned to Fleet Commander Zarkoth. "Commander, I've been analyzing the energy signatures from those stations. Each one is generating power equivalent to a small star. That means they've been accumulating energy for decades. And those weapons, the molecular disruptors, the gravity projectors, those are just what they've shown us. There could be other systems, other capabilities they haven't revealed." Zarkoth nodded grimly. "Which means the humans built these stations not as a temporary defense but as a permanent statement. They're not weapons designed for a single battle. They're monuments. They're saying this is the line and this line will stand forever." As the Caltharian fleet finally cleared human space, disappearing from the Sentinel's sensor range, Murphy ordered the stations to stand down. The weapons ports closed, the shield grids deactivated, the sensor arrays retracted, but the outer shells did not close. The Sentinels remained visible, their true nature exposed for anyone who looked in their direction. Admiral Palmer stood beside Murphy, looking at the displays showing all 12 stations. "So what happens now? Now that the secret is out?" Murphy pulled up a galactic map, showing the location of the outer veil and the 12 Sentinels. "Now we wait. The Caltharians will spread the word. Within a week, every major species will know about the Sentinels. Within a month, they'll be sending their own survey ships to verify the reports. And within a year, our diplomatic position will have completely changed." "How so?" Palmer asked. Dr. Grant answered instead. "Admiral, for 40 years, other species have viewed humanity as weak. We fought one war, took heavy losses, and then retreated to our corner of space. We never expanded, never pushed our borders, never showed aggression. From the outside, we looked like a species that had given up, that had accepted its limitations and decided to live small." She gestured at the displays. "Now they'll know the truth. We weren't weak. We were patient. We weren't defeated. We were preparing. While other species expanded and fought over territory, we built 12 moon-sized weapons platforms and put them to sleep at our borders. We drew a line and made absolutely certain that line could not be crossed. That changes everything." Palmer was quiet for a moment, considering. "You're saying our defensive posture will be seen as strategic strength rather than strategic weakness?" "Exactly," Murphy confirmed. "We never needed to conquer anyone. We never needed to prove our strength in aggressive expansion. We had the Sentinels. We were always strong enough to defend what was ours. We just didn't advertise it. Now everyone knows, and that knowledge will reshape the entire galactic political landscape." 3 days later, the first news began to spread across galactic communication networks. The Caltharian fleet had returned home, and Surveyor Hicksnell had released his complete sensor recordings. Every species with interstellar capability was suddenly watching footage of human weapons that could unmake ships with a touch, and gravity systems that could grab entire fleets like toys. Within a week, as Murphy had predicted, survey ships from a dozen different species appeared at the edge of human space, keeping a respectful distance from the Sentinels, but using powerful sensors to verify the reports. They found exactly what the Caltharians had described. 12 massive battle stations, each one a marvel of engineering and a demonstration of power. But what they didn't know, what Murphy had decided to keep secret, was that the outer veil was just one defensive line. There were 3 other sentinel networks in different regions of human space, each consisting of 12 more stations. 48 weapons platforms in total, all connected, all coordinated, all waiting. The galaxy had learned about 12 sentinels. They had no idea that humanity had built 48. 2 weeks after the Caltharian incident, Murphy received a priority communication from Earth. It was marked with the highest governmental authority. He opened it and read the message from the United Human Council. The message was brief and to the point. The Council had reviewed his actions. They agreed that revealing the Sentinels had been necessary. They also agreed that humanity's defensive posture needed to be made clear to all species. The message continued. As of this date, the Sentinel network is no longer classified. All 12 stations in the outer veil will remain on active status, visible to anyone who wishes to observe them. However, the exact number and location of other Sentinel networks will remain classified for strategic purposes. The galaxy needs to know we are defended. They do not need to know exactly how many defenses we have. Murphy smiled slightly as he read the final paragraph. Commander Murphy, you are hereby authorized to inform any interested parties that human territory is defended by Sentinel-class battle stations of unknown number and capability. You are also authorized to remind them that the Sentinels have been operational for 40 years and will remain operational for the foreseeable future. The line we drew decades ago stands, and it will not be moved. 6 months after the incident, a formal delegation arrived from the Caltharian Empire. They came not in mining vessels but in diplomatic ships, carrying a treaty that recognized all human territorial claims and requested a formal non-aggression pact. Admiral Palmer received them personally, and after 3 days of negotiations, the treaty was signed. The Caltharian ambassador, a different individual than Vexther who had apparently been removed from his position after the disastrous mining expedition, spoke carefully as the treaty was finalized. Ambassador Palmer, my government has authorized me to say that the Caltharian Empire deeply regrets the incident in the outer veil. We acted without proper knowledge or respect for human sovereignty. That mistake will not be repeated. Palmer nodded diplomatically. Ambassador, humanity appreciates the Caltharian Empire's recognition of our territorial boundaries. We hope this incident marks the beginning of a long and peaceful relationship between our peoples. The ambassador hesitated, then spoke more quietly. If I may speak candidly, Admiral, the footage of the Sentinels has been studied extensively by our scientists and military analysts. They have concluded that humanity possesses the most advanced defensive technology known to exist. Some of our strategists believe that the Sentinels could hold off a combined assault from every military power in the galaxy. Is that assessment accurate? Palmer's expression remained neutral. Ambassador, I cannot confirm or deny any specific capability assessments. What I can tell you is that the Sentinels were designed for a single purpose: to ensure that human territory remains human territory. They have fulfilled that purpose for 40 years, and they will continue to fulfill it for as long as necessary. Beyond that, I think it's sufficient to say that humanity has no interest in conquest or expansion. We simply insist on keeping what is already ours. The ambassador nodded slowly. That is all my government needs to know, Admiral. The line has been drawn, the line is defended, and the line will not be crossed. We understand. Back in the command center on Mars, Murphy stood with Dr. Grant, looking at the displays showing all 12 Sentinels in the outer veil. The stations had settled into a new operational status, neither fully active nor fully dormant. Their outer shells remained open, their true nature visible to anyone who looked. They rotated slowly, a constant reminder of human defensive capability. Grant spoke quietly. We built them hoping they would never need to wake up. For 40 years that hope held. Then in a single day everything changed. But maybe it changed for the better. Maybe it's better for everyone to know the line exists rather than to discover it by accidentally crossing it. Murphy nodded. The Caltharians were lucky. They pushed far enough to make us reveal the Sentinels, but not far enough to make us use them at full capacity. They learned the lesson without paying the ultimate price, and now every other species gets to learn from their mistake. A year after the incident, the outer veil had become something unexpected. It had become a destination. Ships from dozens of species would approach, always staying at a respectful distance, always careful not to cross into human territory without permission. They came to see the Sentinels, to witness the weapons that had changed galactic politics simply by existing. Susan Walsh, still stationed at Outpost 7, had gotten used to the constant traffic. She monitored the visiting ships, made sure they stayed outside human territory, and occasionally sent polite warnings when someone drifted too close. Most of the time, the ships simply observed from a distance, taking sensor readings and images to carry back to their home worlds. She had been promoted to full lieutenant commander after the incident, her quick response and accurate reporting earning recognition. But she still preferred the quiet solitude of her remote posting. She was witness to history being made, watching as the galaxy slowly accepted a new reality. Human space was defended. Human boundaries were absolute. And the Sentinels stood eternal watch, silent guardians that would never sleep again. In the darkness of space, the 12 Sentinels of the Outer Veil continued their endless rotation. Their weapon ports glowed with ready energy. Their sensor grids swept the surrounding space. Their shield generators hummed with maintained power. They were no longer disguised as planets. They were revealed as what they had always been, monuments to the idea that some lines cannot be crossed, some boundaries cannot be violated, and some defenses cannot be overcome. They were humanity's answer to the question of how a single species could claim territory in a galaxy full of potential threats. The answer was simple: build guardians so powerful that testing them becomes unthinkable. Build them with patience and foresight. Hide them for decades. And then, when finally revealed, make absolutely certain that everyone understands what they represent. Not aggression, not conquest, just a line in the darkness, drawn with technology and defended with absolute force. A line that says clearly, this far and no further. This is ours and it will remain ours. Not because we wish to deny others their place in the galaxy, but because we have earned our place and we will keep it. The Sentinels stood watch, and the galaxy learned to respect the line they guarded. And in the vast darkness of space, that was enough.